reached the end of Paul's letter to the Philippians and this epistle of joy. And one of the fascinating things that struck me as I was reading this fourth chapter to get ready for this Sunday was I didn't focus on the phrase, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice, which is a verse that probably all of us learned in Sunday school. How many of you learned a song about rejoicing when you were in church camp? Nobody? Oh, see, there's some church camp people. We had this really rowdy song, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. And the boys would yell out the rejoice, and the girls would sing, again, I say rejoice. You know, all that kind of stuff. It was a back and forth sort of thing. And especially with 5th and 6th graders, it was very loud and a great way to wake up in the morning at breakfast. Especially if you were a college-age counselor trying to survive the week with 5th and 6th graders. But that was that song. What really struck me this time when I was reading the passage was there's another verse that we hear frequently. It's often used as a benediction at the end of the worship service. The peace of God which passes all understanding, keep your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. And it just is a verse that kind of seems to drop there at the end of services. And like many verses in the Bible, we find a verse like that and we forget to read the verse or two or three that go right in front of it that might explain it. What we discover when we listen to the first reading today from Philippians is that Paul talks about the peace which passes understanding as if it is the result or the fruit of three other things that he mentions right before them. The practice of gentleness, the letting go of anxiety, and the cultivation of prayer. So let me briefly investigate a little bit about each of those three things today. Paul suggests that the gift of peace is the result of our being gentle, loving people. Now, that's important for us to hear in the 21st century in a society that seems to get crueler and crueler. Just this afternoon, as I was waiting at Hidman's to get new tires put on my car, I read a news item on my phone about Republicans who were burning the Book of Mormon because, there are two Mormons who are running for the Republican nomination, and the ministers who were supporting two of the other Republicans who were running for the nomination had advised that good Christians will burn the Book of Mormon along with, of course, the Quran. And you kind of read that and shake your head and wonder what the heck is going on. It's an indication of the kind of cruelty that seems to characterize our society. And in the midst of that, here's this word about gentleness. It may be difficult for us to realize the kind of congregations that Paul was dealing with. When he wrote this letter to the Philippians, it was during one of his imprisonments. The last one ended up in his execution. The previous one, he wasn't sure whether he would be executed or not. We don't know which one of these imprisonments was the time of the writing of this letter, perhaps the first one. So he was a man who was probably facing death, perhaps facing death. And he was writing to a congregation that he had personally established that was now being divided because of a fight between two women. Can you remember the name of those two women, James? Euodia and Syntyche. Anybody else can pronounce those names as well as James did? I'll be glad to buy you Kool-Aid after worship in the fellowship time. So here are these two women who are anchors of the church, who are arguing with each other, and the congregation is dividing along party lines, as it were. But think about this. According to the book of Acts, when Paul first went to Philippi, his first two converts, the two people on whose be invited to their parties. You would want to be seen with them at various public events. The jailer, on the other hand, was kind of like the guy that ran the guillotine during the French Revolution. He hid for his own safety's sake. What an interesting collection of just these two people that the church began with in Philippi. And the church there was like the church in so many other congregations in the early church, whether founded by Peter or Paul or John or James. There were people who were wealthy, who had homes big enough to actually host the congregation when it met on Sunday mornings, and there were people who were social outcasts, people who had been pushed to the margins of society. It was that kind of congregation that Paul was writing to. And Paul reminds them, in the midst of their divisiveness, of their common bonds, and in the midst of their fighting with each other, he urges them to be gentle, to pray for one another, to be confident, and to be joyful. I think the sort of message he was trying to get across to that congregation then can be really glimpsed when we look at the story of the wedding banquet in the gospel today. I think the wedding banquet can be helpful. You remember the wedding banquet? Jesus invites these people and they don't show up. And so he goes out, he has his servants go out, and he brings other people in, and he finally has a wedding banquet. We had another song about that at church camp, didn't we? Anybody remember that one? Nobody remembers I cannot come to the banquet. Don't bother me now. Oh yeah, you could add verses. It was all about all the excuses people made for not coming to the banquet. But the point is, that's Luke's gospel. In Luke's gospel, they were disinvited because they were sent invitations and they made excuses to not show up. In Matthew's gospel, which we hear today, they're disinvited because they're violent. They set upon the people who sent out the invitations and beat them up and even kill them. Whoever it is that's throwing the banquet does not want violent people there. Gentleness. Gentleness is what's called for in the church, in our congregations. It was certainly something that Paul was exhorting the Philippians to. And it is something that is constant. We don't think of gentleness as one of those key things for understanding Christianity. We think of faith, hope, and love. And yet the word gentle is used a dozen different times in the New Testament to describe not just the leaders of the church, but members of the church and their relationship to each other and to the people outside the walls of their community. The letter of James describes the gifts of wisdom and includes gentleness. Paul includes gentleness in his list of the fruits of the Spirit. Titus and Timothy, those two letters describe gentleness as characteristics of those who wish to be leaders in the community. And I've often wondered, the very end of this parable, one guy is thrown out because he's got the wrong garment on. Now, it's a parable. It's not because he went to the wrong store at the mall and bought the wrong thing to wear at the party. It's a symbol, that garment, of something. And I imagine if the people in Philippi listened to that story, the garments would have been their divisiveness, their willingness to argue with each other, their eagerness to harp on things. So, what garment are we wearing to the banquet? Are we wearing the garments of old grudges? Are we nursing painful memories? Are we cloaking ourselves in the robes of violence or hatred or cynicism? Or shall we wear the garment of compassion? Or perhaps the garment of joy or love Peace is the fruit of gentleness. Peace also, according to Paul, is the fruit, the result of letting go of our anxiety. Another way to put that with one simple word is confidence. What does it mean to be a confident person in a world that plays on our doubts and our anxieties and our fears? How many of you know Mary Oliver, the poet? You need to read Mary Oliver. She writes a lot about nature. She and her partner, Molly Malone Cook, lived in Provincetown for over 40 years. Molly died in 2005. One of her poems that speaks to me is a poem called I Worried. I worried a lot. Will the gardens grow? Will the rivers flow in the right direction? Will the earth turn as it was taught? And if not, how shall I correct it? Was I wrong? Was I right? Will I be forgiven? Can I do better? Will I ever be able to sing? Even the sparrows can do it, and I am, well, hopeless. Is my eyesight fading, or am I just imagining it? Am I going to get rheumatism? Lockjaw? Dementia? Finally, I saw that worrying had come to nothing, and I gave it up. I took my old body and went out into the morning and sang. Now, some of our anxieties, of course, do stem from that exaggerated sense of responsibility and the idea that the world revolves around us. Like Mary says, I wondered if the world would continue to turn and the rivers would continue to flow. But we also worry about things in the past that we can't change. Things that we've done and things that have been left undone. We worry about our deteriorating health or our eyesight, like Mary does, or the concerns that we have about those that we love. And Mary would suggest to us, and I think Paul would do the same thing, let go of those anxieties, hard as that may be. Maybe a way to let go is to get up in the morning and walk outside and sing, even if you don't think you can sing. Grace tells us, the doctrine of grace, the Christian doctrine of grace, which is so central to our faith, tells us that we are accepted just as we are. We may not be the kind of people we want to be or hope to be. We may be a long way from our goals. We may have more failures in our lives than achievements at a given time, but we're still accepted. We are accepted by God and held in God's hands and loved no matter where we find ourselves or where others find us. If we can just believe that and glimpse that for a moment, that the world still is a place for us in which to live and flourish. Anxiety, at least for a moment, disappears. Peace is the result of letting go of our anxieties. Thirdly, peace is the result of prayer. Now here's Paul facing possible death and a divided congregation that he spent a lot of time with and has been very supportive of him. And his advice to them is to rejoice in God and pray, for the Lord is near. Now, living in the Bible Belt, when we hear somebody say, for the Lord is near, we think that they're talking about the end of time. Jesus is coming soon. And certainly Paul believed that. He believed that Jesus was going to be back sometime in the next 15 or 20 years. He was wrong. People in the Bible are sometimes wrong. But the other way in which that phrase can be understood in the Greek is the Lord is present. The Lord is standing next to you. The Lord is not distant, not far away. And that is so important for us to hear. joined the army so that he could have food to eat every day. Joining the army, he had clothing, he had food, he had a roof over his head. That's what the bishop promised me when I told him I wanted to be a priest years ago. Well, he joined the army, and in a battle, he busted up his ankle, which made it kind of difficult for him to join in the charges in the next battle. So they kicked him out of the army. And he hobbled all the way back to Paris and sought out a Carmelite monastery to see if he could join them. And they said, well, no, but you can work in the kitchen for a while. And he did. And eventually they decided, you know, this guy has something.